Well, good morning. I'd like to take a few minutes just to explain why I've decided to transition from your typical vertical Langstroth hive over to what I call a long Langstroth or a horizontal hive. There are so many advantages, but I'm going to give you about 12 or 13, and I am converting my hives over to these for a number of reasons. Well, number one, they've got superior insulation. Typically, your deeps and your supers on a vertical hive are 3/4 of an inch thick. The way I've constructed these horizontal hives, it's 1.5 inches thick. There's also 3/4 of an inch on the bottom, which is superior to the insulation provided by the regular boxes. Secondly, all beekeeping is performed at waist height. For example, I'm going to go ahead and remove the top, and although it looks cumbersome, it's less than 20 pounds. It rolls in at about 15 pounds. And you can see that rather than going vertically like a typical hive, and oftentimes if one of these supers is filled with honey, there are 3 supers on top of 2 deeps right here in the traditional hive. This could be a little bit cumbersome, especially as I'm getting older. These might be 40, 50 pounds if they're loaded with honey. And this is sort of an unusual, not really a correct biomechanical lifting procedure if you're trying to elevate that from this height. So all the work is performed at waist height. All the frames are deep frames. Typically in your medium supers, you might have a medium frame, but every frame in this hive is a deep frame, which means there's a greater ability for the bees to pull out more comb, to draw out comb. And the more comb there is, of course, the more honey there is. So all the frames are deep frames. These are called cover boards, and the cover boards actually cover the frames. I'll show you what these do in just a moment. You can see that's very well ventilated. These cover boards are 3/4 of an inch thick, which provide an extra layer of insulation for the beehive. And I also believe that the cover boards provide a lot of security for the bees. Typically, when I have to do an inspection on my vertical hive, I have to uncover a minimum of 8 frames. This is an 8-frame hive, so we're exposing the bees to the elements if there are any, or just making them somewhat unnerved. So the beauty of this horizontal hive is that I only uncover 2 or 3 frames at a time, which maintains bee security for the rest of the frames. This is really 2 hives in one. You can see there are a lot of frames. That's 20 frames in this one hive. This has the capacity of holding 31 frames. And you'll see the 2 openings on the front of the hive, which allows for 2 hives in one. The hives are separated by a follow board. It's a piece of plywood with a handle on it. These little doodads allow bees from visiting each other. It's all right, from one colony to another. And what's really neat about it, welcome to life. What's really neat about it is as the hive grows horizontally and the population increases, then we simply move this follow board. If each hive is growing at the same rate, then each hive will end up with approximately 15 frames. What I also love about the horizontal hive is that typically beekeepers have several hives, and it's really important to make a comparison from one hive's population to the other. So when you have to open both hives, you are exposing the bees to the elements, decreasing their personal security, and causing maybe a little bit of a temporary ruckus for them. But when you have a horizontal hive, it's so easy to compare the frames and the population and the condition of one hive to the other, because they're all held within the same box. As I mentioned before, all the work is performed at waist level, which means there's no heavy lifting of supers, and these hives, these frames, I mean, can easily be taken from the box and deposited into something like a bee butler or a plastic box, and then carry the frames as you need them to your extractor. I love this hive because I've also got grandsons, and they help me tend the bees from time to time. And because they're just little guys, and they're standing about this height, they have the ability to look into the hive and see it from every perspective when they're in their little bee suits. But you'll notice that once you get beyond a couple of deeps and start to add your first super for their honey production, this is getting a little high for my grandchildren to look into. And of course, I'm not at all willing to lift them up when I'm fumbling with a smoker or my hive tools or a brush, any of that. So they're actually able to look into this hive and see its entirety. These hives have been used all over Europe for decades. I would recommend that you do your own research, of course, and look into their use and their functionality. I also really love the cover because in colder climates, you can see that a little inlay of insulation can be applied, which adds another inch on top of the 3/4 of the inch that the cover boards provide. And this could simply be applied by going to a local box store, getting a piece of styrofoam, or something that maybe is a little more environmentally friendly. You could always staple some burlap or cotton or something like that up in here. Although burlap and cotton are great places for small hive beetles to hang out. So this is neat and clean, it's easy, it can easily be done. It's just a few bucks to get that 1 extra inch of insulation. As you can see, it is a well ventilated hive. So airflow will come in through the opening, through one of these screened cover boards that we showed you earlier, and then the airflow will flow out of each end of that hive. So that's about it. I am going to be taking orders for these beginning in September. Serious inquiries only, please. I'll give you some sort of information to message me if you're interested. By the way, the cost on these is $300 as is. When you think about that as a cost, it sounds very, very expensive. But just in this one hive, excluding the cost of the frames and their foundation, I have over $450. And when you think about 2 hives being housed in one large box, that's a pretty significant and efficient use of one's money. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I would recommend that you do your own research. Look into a guy named Dr. Leo on the internet, horizontalhives.com. He's got some plans there, of course, and he's got all kinds of information about the functionality, the use, the durability of these hives. Oh, and one other thing, a lot of these, when people make these horizontal hives, they'll just put on any old 2x4, but these are Eastern red cedar, and they are very strongly attached with 4 3-inch screws, and they provide excellent protection from weather, from wetness, any insects that might try to bore, they cannot because of its natural qualities. And I think that's about it. So if you need to get in contact with me, I will give some information on how to order these hives.